Hi, so we're chatting today about India's abortion laws, the MTP Act, Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act in India. And the reason we're doing this is actually for two reasons. One, about 6 months ago, June 2022, the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And obviously, this affects the women's constitutional right to an abortion. And this created sort of traction and discussion around the topic all over the world. People were discussing sexual and reproductive rights. So, Arya Chaudhary, you're a legal student. Why do you think Roe v. Wade and a judgment in the US really affected people all over the world?
Yeah, well, I think that especially in the West, there's a perception that abortion laws and laws in general are very liberal. And I think that the death of Roe v. Wade drastically limited access to abortion, which made people globally consider where their own abortion laws stood in comparison, and how they support women's rights and protect their own access to abortion.
Yeah, and Persis, I think you'd agree that in India, maybe people were feeling, my God, if this is going to happen in the US and in the West, what's going to happen in our part of the world? But Arya, you looked at India's MTP Act, and why do you think young people, young women and young people need to know about the law and need to understand it better?
Yeah, well, I think that information and knowledge is definitely empowering, and being informed about the law, especially one like the MTP Act, which affects something as fundamental as a woman's ability to exercise choice and control over her body, is really important for young women and people to be aware of. And I also think that the MTP Act can only really be fully effective if we're aware of what it allows. So there's a lot of bias and stigma associated with seeking access to an abortion. So that may lead young people to think that the law doesn't actually protect their right to access one. And being aware of the law and what it allows is a way to fight that.
Yeah. So tell me, now that you've looked at the MTP Act, if I had to ask you, what are 3 or 4 very key things that you believe every young person in India should know about the MTP Act? What comes to mind?
Yeah, well, I think that the act, it sort of divides what a woman, when the circumstances under which a woman can terminate her pregnancy during 3 different stages of the pregnancy. So up to 20 weeks, she needs the approval of 1 medical practitioner to be able to terminate it. From 20 to 24 weeks, she needs the opinion of 2 medical practitioners. And then after 24 weeks, she needs the approval of a medical board. So I think that's definitely important to know what sort of approval you
Sorry
need.
to interrupt you. I just want to say that I know you looked at this before September 2022, and Persis, we're going to just talk in a second about what has changed ever since the new judgment. What else comes to mind, Arya?
Well, there's also the fact that a minor needs the approval of one guardian to be able to terminate her pregnancy. And then after the age of 18, the only consent that's required is that of the woman's.
Yeah.
And then there's also the fact, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying that's interesting because I think in India, when there's a young woman still living in her parental home, there might, of course, Persis, am I right? There might, of course, be social pressures. But I think important, as you said earlier, Arya, to feel empowered and know that legally it is your right to make that choice for yourself.
Yeah, and there's also husbands and parents have, like, in the past pressured women and made them unaware of the fact that under the law, their consent is the only one that's required. So I think women being aware of the fact that they're the only people when they're over the age of 18 that need to agree to this procedure is really important.
So Persis is a women and child rights lawyer and is really feeling optimistic and celebrating the judgment, the landmark judgment, September 2022.
Yes.
Around the MTP Act. So, Persis, I think the most interesting part is how currently the law does not discriminate, therefore, between any kind of a person, married, unmarried, cis,
Unmarried.
other, single, live-in, etc. But anyway, you talk about what are the highlights of the judgment for you?
I think this judgment also is a little more significant because it came after the US Supreme Court judgment, right? So, as Arya rightly pointed out, that a lot of people believe that the law is much more progressive in the West. But that may not always be the case. And certainly here, that's kind of proved it in a way. And I think what Justice Chandrachud's judgment really does is that even if you see the way his judgment begins, where he says that the judgment is not limited to cis women, it applies to all persons who may bear children, all women who may bear children, right? So I think that, the starting point itself of the judgment is taking a much broader view. The overall theme of the judgment focuses on reproductive autonomy, focuses on choice. He repeatedly talks about dignity of the woman, fundamental right to privacy, which are very important constitutional values under Article 14 of our Constitution, Article 21. So that's really the broad underlining framework of the judgment. And that's why it gives me a lot of hope. And I think another reason is, of course, the limited issue that went to the court was a lady who was, 22 weeks pregnant, and she first approached the Delhi High Court saying that, yes, a 25-year-old woman, and she was 22 weeks pregnant at that point of time, unmarried. And she approached the Delhi High Court for permission to abort. And she was denied permission because of the MTP Act and the procedures. And as Arya pointed out, different gestational periods of pregnancy. And so technically under the Act, the Delhi High Court said that it was not permitted. And then when she approached the Supreme Court, while the Delhi High Court's view was more, why does she want to kill the child, or why does she want to kill the fetus? I think what the Supreme Court did is that it took a very pro-choice, the judgment was pro-choice, the decision was pro-choice. The focus was that, yes, she's an unmarried woman, but there cannot be a difference between a married and an unmarried woman. And what Justice Chandrachud's judgment says is that it goes a step further to say that I don't believe that the legislature also wanted to distinguish between married and unmarried women. And in one place he also says that maybe this distinction comes from a very patriarchal notion of what sex is permissible. So like married sex is permissible. So I think those have been very important aspects of the judgment. Another point that really appealed to me in his judgment, which Arya herself mentioned, was that an adult woman doesn't need permission, doesn't need to seek permission of her spouse or her partner or her parents for an abortion. But because many medical practitioners are so fearful, or sometimes even because of misinformation, they insist, and I have seen cases where they have insisted that a spouse or a partner signs off on the process. And the judgment says that this is extra legal. Yeah. This is not what the law prescribes, and therefore medical practitioners should not ask for additional documentation. They should not seek approval of family members prior to the abortion. So really the focus of this judgment has been the dignity, the choice of the woman and her autonomy, her reproductive autonomy. And that's what I think gives me hope.
Yeah, so something for us to celebrate. It's not that often that within the sphere of gender justice and systems and rights that we have a lot to feel hopeful about. But this is a good one. That I hope everyone finds out about, and for more, we'll have Arya's videos where she talks more in detail about the laws on the Intention Collective website. So thanks, both of you.